All right, guys. Hopefully, y'all had a good Christmas break. It was a nice, longer one than normal, but hopefully, it was enjoyable. Y'all had a good time, got some rest, relaxation. And luckily, before we start really the next chapter, we're going to go back over factoring. How to factor polynomial functions, because again, for the next chapter, our rational functions, factoring is going to be helpful. Factoring is going to be an essential part of rational equations. So you will need a note sheet if you don't have one. So when we factored polynomial expressions, especially quadratics, these degree 2, we had a few steps. And the first step is to see if there is a greatest common factor. If there's a greatest common factor between the 3 terms, 4 terms, however many terms, we need to factor it out. And as we look at these 3 terms here, b squared, 12b, and 20, there is no greatest common factor. And since this is indeed a quadratic, we can move on to step number 2, our 2 sets of parentheses. With 3 spaces. And again, our 3 spaces is more just to make sure we have enough room or have the parentheses spaced far enough apart that we can fill everything in. Our third step is to find the signs. And we have 2 cases with finding the signs. And it's all based off the third term. If the third term is positive, then the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. And the other case is if the third term is negative. Then the signs are opposite. So if the third term is positive, then the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Now, if we look at this here, our third term is our 20. And its sign is positive. So the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. And the middle term is also positive. So that means both of our signs are the same, and they're both going to be positive. Questions on this so far? All right. Now that does bring us to our fourth step. We need to find the factors of the first and third term. We can go on and say step 5 is to plug in those factors and check to make sure we have the correct middle term. So step 4 is to find the factors of the first and third term. And the last step is to plug in and check. Now, if we look at this here, b squared plus 12b plus 20, so the factors of the first term would be the factors of b squared. We're trying to see what times, or what multiplies together to be b squared. Well, there's only one thing that multiplies together to be b squared, and that's b and b. So the only factors of b squared are b and b. b times b is b squared. Now, factors of 20, our third term. There's a few more than just one set, because we do have 1 and 20, but we also have 2 and 10. 3 is not a factor, but 4 is. We'd have 4 and 5. So all of our factors are 20. All the numbers that multiply together to give us 20, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Questions on how we found the factors of the first and third term. Now, we didn't list out the factors of the first term because there's exactly one. Since there's only one possibility, we go on and just plug those in. So it's less for us to worry about. Now, the factors of 20, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Which one do we want to try first? 2 and 10. Because again, at this point, we're just wanting to pick factors of 20 and see if they work. Because our last part of this is to check. And when we're checking, we're trying to make sure we get back to where we start. Now, normally, in a lot of books and a lot of places, it would want us to check the whole thing. So it would want us to start off with multiplying b times b. Well, b times b is b squared. Well, that's where we got the factors of b and b from, or from b squared. So it should get us back to our b squared term. The other one I don't normally check is the 2 times 10, our last ones. Because 2 times 10 is 20. Well, where did we get the 2 and 10 from? The factors of 20. They will get back to the first and third term. The main term that we're focused on is this middle term. And where we get the middle term from is this outer set, the b times 10. And b times 10 is positive 10b. And then we have 2 times b plus 2b, which gives us 12b, which is our middle term. Does this match with our middle term? Yes. So b plus 2 times b plus 10 are the factors of this quadratic. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one? And luckily these here after the first one don't take as long because we're not having to write out every single step. We're not having to wait for me to write all the steps back out. Because when we look at any of these here, factoring, trying to solve these by factoring, or just solving in general, greatest common factor is always a great place to start. Because if we look at a squared, 4a, and 32, is there a term or number in common with all three? Because 4a and 32 do have a common factor of 2. Actually, they have a common factor of 4. But is there a factor of 2 or 4 with a squared? No, it's just 1. We don't have a number in front of a squared. And 32 does not have an a term. So there is no greatest common factor. One good way to see if there is one is seeing, is there a variable in common with all three? And does one of the variables not have a number? If it doesn't have a number, it's probably not going to have one. Here, there is no greatest common factor. So since there is no greatest common factor, we can move on to our two sets of parentheses with three spaces. Now we can find the sign. If the third term is positive, then the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Here, yes, since the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. One of them is going to be plus, one of them is going to be minus. At this point, it really doesn't matter which one's plus, which one's minus. We just need to put them in as opposite signs. And the reason that we can do this is really our last step when we check it. We're checking to make sure we have it set up correctly, because if we do, we're good. If not, we can change it. We can flip the signs. We can change the numbers to make it work. Our next step is to find the factors of the first and third term. Factors of a squared. A and a. Really with this variable squared, a and a, x and x, those are the only ones that we can have for this here. 32 on the other hand. Well, we can have 1 times 32. But what we'll also have is 2 times 16. All right, guys. 3 is not a factor of 32. So we have 4 and 8. 5 is not a factor of 32 because it doesn't end as a 0 or 5. 6 is not a factor of 32 because both 2 and 3 are not, and that really gives us all the factors just here. Now at this point we need to pick one of these three here to try first. So we can try 4 and 8. And the last step is to check. So the first thing we're going to check is 8 times negative 8, which will be negative 8a. 4 times a is going to be positive 4a. And negative 8a plus 4a, negative 8 plus 4. Negative 4a. Yes. Now we did get the correct number, 4a, but we got the wrong sign because we needed positive, not negative. If you ever get the correct number but wrong sign, come up here and change the signs. Because if we check this again, a times 8 is now positive 8a. Negative 4 times a is negative 4a, making it positive 4a instead of negative 4a. So we have a minus 4 times a plus 8. Questions on this here? Please ready for the next one. X squared minus 17x plus 72. And again, a great place to start, where I'd always start, is greatest common factor. Now, looking at this here, there is kind of a giveaway in that there's not a greatest common factor, and that's the x squared. Is there a number in front of x squared? No. So it's telling us between x squared, 17x, and 72, there's not a number that will go into all three. Is there a variable with 72? No. So there can't be a term that's in common with all three, because those two don't share anything, the rest won't. So that means we can move on to step number 2. Our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Yes, one is actually greatest common factor, but doesn't do a whole lot, unfortunately. Let's find the sign. Third term is positive. So the signs are the same and match the sign of that middle term, which is negative. So we're going to have negative and negative. Now at this point here, we need to find the factors of the first and third term. X squared is just going to be x and x. Now 72, on the other hand, has several. And with any of these numbers, I'm going to always start with 1 and it, so 1 and 72. The next one I'm going to check is 2. So 2 is, yes, 2 is a factor, 2 and 36. Then I'd check 3. 3 is indeed a factor. 3 and 24. 4 and 18. 5 doesn't work because it ends in a 2. 6 does work because both 2 and 3 are factors. 6 and 12. 7 doesn't work. 8 does. 28 times 9. And then we're done. And one of the nice ways to know that we're done is that the left side and right side have met, because the next number after 8 would be 9. So if the numbers on the left get equal to or bigger than the numbers on the right, we're finished, because that's all the factors. Now the question is, which one of these do we want to try? 9. Yes, thank you. Go and grab a note sheet. Now we just need to check this here. So we'll do x times negative 9, which would be negative 9x. Negative 8 times x would be negative 8x. Negative 9x minus 8x is negative 17x. Now the nice thing with checking this middle term, we can't necessarily type this on the calculator because, again, both calculators that we have need to have a value for the variable. But we can still do negative 9 minus 8, which would give us negative 17, so negative 17x. We can do the coefficients. Questions on this here? Hopefully this is becoming a little more easier because we've gone over this a few times now, so it's hopefully familiar. Let's look at this one here, x squared minus 7x minus 30. Again, always good to start with greatest common factor. This one here, unfortunately, does not have one because of the x squared, not a number in front of it. Most likely not going to be one. 7x 30, there is not a term or number that is in common with all three. So we'll move on to our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Find the sign. The third term in this case is negative. And if the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. Now, which one you put as positive, which one's negative really doesn't matter. I just habitually just put the first one positive, second one negative. Our next step is find the factors of the first and third term. All these here have just been x squared, a squared, variable squared, so we will still have x and x. Even when we do get to one with the number times x squared is still going to be x and x. Might as well put it down there. No need to repeat it with all the other factors of it, the first term. Factors of the third term. We're looking at the factors of 30. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 2 and 10, 4 doesn't work, 5 and 6. If you don't have them all memorized, that's fine, because all we got to do is take a calculator and divide each one and see if it comes out evenly. Now, one of the questions that does sometimes come up is, why are we taking the factors of 30 and not negative 30? Because they do have the negative in front of it. And the reason we're taking just 30 and not negative 30 is we already took care of the sign. We're not having to look at the factors of negative 30 because of step 3, find the sign. We took care of that, so we're not having to look at the factors of negative 30. And that seems like an odd thing. It doesn't seem like it'd make a big difference. But especially if we're looking at the factors of, say, negative 30, we would indeed have negative 1 times 30, negative 2 times 15, negative 3 times 10, negative 5 times 6. But we'd also have 1 times negative 30, 2 times negative 15, 3 times negative 10, and 5 times negative 6. We've all of a sudden doubled the number of factors because of that one sign. But step 3, taking care of that sign, gets rid of all those extra factors worrying about signs. We just have to worry about the number. Now, looking at these factors, 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, we need to pick one to try first and see if it works. Which one do we want to try first? 3 and 10. Which one goes first, which one goes second? Does and doesn't matter at the same time, because we need to pick one to try. And if we get it right, awesome. If not, we can fix it. Because again, our last step is to check. Our x times negative 10 would be negative 10x. Our 3 times x is going to be plus 3x. So we need to take negative 10x plus 3x. And again, I said we can do this in a calculator. We can't type the whole thing in. But we can type the negative 10 plus 3 in, which gives us negative 7, telling us that this is negative 7x. Is that the middle term we wanted? Yes. So these here are indeed our correct factors. That's it. Questions on this here? How are we feeling about factoring? Is it coming back to us a little bit here and there? All right. We feel good with these here. Yeah? Do we want to see another one like this here? Okay. If we work this through, this would end up factoring to p plus 10 times p plus 5. I want to look at number 8. Let's look at the next one. This one is a little bit different than the last one. Not by a whole lot, just a little bit. Because up to this point, we've talked about step number one, our greatest common factor, and immediately move on, yes? Looking at these three terms, is there a greatest common factor between the three terms? 2, because 2 goes into 2r squared, 6r, and 8. Since there is a greatest common factor of 2, we're going to factor it out. Now, 2 is not going to make a huge difference, but it will make some of the factors a little bit nicer. Because if we factor 2 out of 2r squared, essentially what we're doing is dividing it by 2. It reduces it to r squared. Plus, if we factored 2 out of 6r, we divide it by 2, we have 3r. And if we divide or factor the 2 out of the 8, it goes from -8 to -4. And we can look at it again, r squared, 3r, -4, r squared, 3r, and 4. There's no other greatest common factors there. So we've gotten all the common factors, our greatest common factor out. Which means we can move on to our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Now, if there is a greatest common factor and we factor it out, we do need to make sure that we leave it as part of our answer, because it is included. Questions on this so far? Well, now we move on to our signs. Since here the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. One's going to be positive, one's negative. Now we need to find the factors of the first and third term. Our first term is r squared. So the only factors of r squared are r and r. Apparently someone did not get enough. R and R.
Heard of it. It clicked in my mind, but I just couldn't remember what R and R was.
Rest and relaxation. Because you want a little R and R. Rest and relaxation.
I was thinking of the commercial.
Yeah. Now we need to find the factors of 4, which are 2 and 2. Which one do we want to try first? 1 and 4. 1 and 4. 4 and 1. Now, luckily, the more that you do these and the more that we see them, we kind of start getting more of an instinct of which number should go where, which does help us when we go to check. Because if we check this here, 4 times -1 gives us -r. 4 times r is going to give us positive 4r. Gives us our positive 3r that we wanted. So we get 2 times r plus 4 times r minus 1. Now on a whole, it's not any real different than what we've been doing. We just pull the greatest common factor out first and solve from there. Questions on this here? All right. 4x squared minus 20x minus 56. First step's greatest common factor. Is there a greatest common factor between these 3 terms? I think there might be one. Because 4 and 20 have a greatest common factor of 4, because 20 would go to 5, yes. 4 and 56. is actually divisible across all three. So here, 4x squared, 20x, and 56 actually has the greatest common factor of 4. Which is, all it's really saying is that we could divide 4 out of all three terms and simplify it down. Because if we factor the 4 out of 4x squared, we get x squared. If we factor the 4 out of 20x, we divide the 20 by 4, we get 5x. If we divide the 56 by 4, we get 14. Now, since we have the greatest common factor factored out, we can move on to our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. And then we can find the sign. Since the third term is negative, the signs are opposite, different. One's going to be positive, one is going to be negative. Since we've taken care of the signs, we can move on to the factors of the first and third term. Now our factors of our first term, x squared, are just going to be x and x. Factors of the third term, we're looking at the factors of 14, which is 1 and 14, 2 and 7, and that's it. Now this here, we're trying to get a middle term of 5x, because since we took the 4 out of the middle term, or took it out, we're not looking at 20x anymore. We're just looking at the 5x. Now we would technically still get the 20, but we'd have to multiply the 4 back in. Now, with that there, do we want to try 1 and 14 or 2 and 7? 2 and 7. Which one goes first, 2 or 7? 2. 7. And we can check this here. X times negative 7 would be negative 7x. 2 times x would be positive 2x. And negative 7x plus 2x would give us negative 5x. Is that the middle term that we wanted? Yes. So 4 times x plus 2 times x minus 7 are the correct factors. Now, as a side note, we could have gotten the correct factors or got it factored without factoring out the greatest common factor of 4. But one of the nice things, and this is one thing I want to point out, is when we found the factors of the third term for this here, we were finding the factors of 14 instead of the factors of what? 56. Because if we left it factors of 56, well, it is 1 and 56. We also have 2 and 28. 3 does not work. So we have 4 and 14. 5 doesn't work. 6 doesn't work. 7 and 8. So instead of just having 2 factors, 1 and 14, 2 and 7, we now have to check 1 and 56, 2 and 28, 4 and 14, 7 and 8. But we also have to have the first term is now has factors of 4, 1 and 4, or 2 and 2. We also have to get those factors in too. So just by factoring that 4 out, we've reduced the number of factors we've had to work with. That's why it's nice, because it gives us less to work with. It makes it easier on us. Questions on this here? Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll take that. All right, guys. There's two more that we're going to look at. This one here. 9x squared plus 30x plus 6. Now looking at this here, is there a greatest common factor between 9x squared, 30x, and 6? 3. So we can factor it out of all three terms. So if we factor the 3 out of 9x squared, we get 3x squared. Factor the 3 out of 30x, we get 10x. We factor the 3 out of 6, we get 2. Since there is no other greatest common factor, we'll have our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Since the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. So they're both positive, plus and plus. Now at this point here, we need to find the factors of the first and third term. 3x squared. Well, the x squared is just x and x. That's the only factors of x squared. Factors of 3 are 1 and 3, and that's it. So we can just put the 3 in one of the two spots. Factors of 2 are 1 and 2. Only one set of factors, so we can just put 1 and 2. And then we can check to see if we get 10x. 3x times 2 is 6x. 1 times x is plus x, giving us 7x. Is that the middle term we wanted? No. We can switch to 1 and 2. And do 3x times 1, which is 3x. 2 times x is plus 2x, giving us 5x. Is that the middle term we wanted? Are there any other factors for our first or third term? That is as simplified as it gets. Because not every polynomial, every quadratic will factor. So this does not factor this here. This is actually as far as it goes. We can take a greatest common factor out, and that's it. Now, it might be nice to have a way to check and make sure that something does factor, to make sure we didn't do this or miss something here. And there is. Now this here is the quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now something that's interesting is if it factors this part here, the square root of b squared minus 4ac will come out to be a nice whole number. Because if it comes out to be a whole number, it's factorable. If it doesn't, then it's not. So if we wanted to check this here, square root. So b squared, our b term is 10. 10 squared minus 4 times our a term, which is 3, times c, which is 2. Square root of b squared minus 4ac. We can take this and plug it into the calculator. And it doesn't matter which one we use. So if I take the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2, we get what? 2 squared of 19. That is not a whole number. That's an irrational number. So it's telling us that that quadratic does not factor any further. So 3 times 3x squared plus 10x plus 2 is completely factored. It does still factor with the greatest common factor, but that's as far as it goes. Questions on this here? And that's it. So on the worksheet, 1 of the 12 is not factorable at all. 1 just has a greatest common factor. On the one that does not factor, you can just put not factorable.